All right, good evening. This is Ellie Cowan, Director of Engagement at Preservation Maryland, and I want to thank you for joining us for tonight's telephone town hall to discuss the current threats facing the federal historic tax credit. And we will be taking your questions live on air at the end of our discussion. And to ask a question, please dial *3 at any point during the call. So tonight we will be hearing from Nicholas Redding, Executive Director of Preservation Maryland, Rene Kuhlman, Director of Policy Outreach, Government Relations and Policy at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and Joseph Summers of Cross Street Partners, a national redevelopment firm who've utilized the historic tax credit on some of their projects. So again, we will be taking your questions live on the air at the end of the call. So if at any point during the town hall you have a question, please press *3 and you will be entered into the queue. There will also be an opportunity after the call to leave a message with any additional questions, and we will get back to you with an answer. Again, press *3 anytime during the call to ask a question. So I think that takes care of the housekeeping. So without further ado, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about the current situation with tax reform and how that affects the federal historic tax credit?
Absolutely. So this is Nick Redding, and you're not listening to a recording. We're live, and we are so pleased to have so many of you on the call with us right now. This is probably one of the largest telephone gatherings of preservationists ever in Maryland history. So we're excited to be able to speak with all of you, and I'm excited to be able to speak with all of you directly, because this is something we've been working on really tirelessly for months now, and we have gotten ourselves into a decent situation, but we absolutely need the support of preservationists, not only across the state of Maryland, but really nationwide to get us across the finish line. So as many of you are probably familiar, tax reform is moving very quickly. And we've known this was probably on the horizon for several years, and the preservation community was preparing itself for that day. And what ended up happening, a little bit of a surprise in the sense that when the House bill came out, it did end up eliminating the federal historic tax credit from the bill that the House proposed and the bill that ultimately the House passed. And that's a big problem because the federal historic tax credit is truly, and I don't say this with any exaggeration, it is the most important tool that the historic preservation community has. It has saved over 42,000 structures around the nation. It is the biggest investment that the federal government has ever made in historic preservation. And so it's critical that we save this program. And there's a wide number of different reasons for that, and we're going to talk about those. But the House eliminated the program from their bill. And when the Senate came out with their bill, and this all happened very quickly just in the past few weeks, the Senate initially put their bill in that the tax credit would be reduced to 10%. So it's currently a 20% tax credit on the qualified rehab expenditures associated with a rehab. So if you have a $1 million project, it's a $200,000 credit. And the Senate would have reduced that to 10%. But because of the persistent action of preservationists, both here in Maryland and across the country, we were able to get an amendment to that original bill before it left the Senate Finance Committee that restored the credit to 20%. It did make some other changes to the credit, not all great, but things that we can live with. But ultimately, it does preserve the credit at 20%. But that sets up a situation, and that's why we're calling you tonight, where the House bill and the Senate bill are in conflict with each other. And so what is going to end up happening is that they're going to go to a conference committee, and we'll hear from our friends at the National Trust for Historic Preservation about what that means and how that process will play out. But it's absolutely critical at this moment that listeners on this call reach out to their members of the federal delegation in Washington to make sure that they know that the historic tax credit matters to you and that you want to see it preserved in the final bill. And all of this information, you don't have to write it down. You can just go to preservehtc.org, which is a special website that Preservation Maryland has put together so that you can take action immediately by going there. So we've been very busy on all of these issues. We've worked very closely with Senator Cardin, who has been a tremendous champion of the historic tax credit. We have worked to get the city of Baltimore, the city of Cambridge, and the town of Easton all to pass resolutions in support of the historic tax credit. We have worked with our friends at the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy on the Eastern Shore to put an op-ed in newspapers and hope to have several more op-eds appearing across the state in the coming days. But just to kind of give you an idea before we hear about what's going to happen next, just about the size of the impacts here in Maryland. We have, just since 2002, 505 buildings have been rehabilitated thanks to the federal historic tax credit here in Maryland for a total development cost, if you can imagine this, of over $2 billion worth of rehabilitated structures. So for about $340 million in tax credits, the federal government received, as a result, $2 billion in developed projects. And so what that means is for every dollar the federal government puts into this program, they get about $1.20 in return. So the federal government actually makes money on this. And they do that because of the increased local taxes, the increased income, and the number of jobs. Here in Maryland alone since 2002, this program has created 28,000 jobs. 15,000 of which are permanent jobs. So all across the state, from Cumberland to Cambridge, and certainly the city of Baltimore, we have seen a tremendous amount of impact as a result of this. And we can't let this slip, and we have to make certain that this tax credit program is retained in the final bill that comes out of the conference committee, which will be impaneled just in the next couple of days here. So, Allie, that's kind of where we currently stand. I'm wondering if we perhaps have a question that we could take from the audience to see if anyone has any questions at this point before we move on to our next speaker.
Sure. We do have one from one of our online participants, and they asked, so it seems like tax reform is already done. Is there really anything that we can do about it?
So hopefully from the sincerity of my pitch here, you can tell that there is absolutely something that can be done. And what can be done at this point is to reach out to your member of Congress, whether they're a Democrat or Republican. It's a bipartisan bill. It's a bipartisan program. There's a lot of bipartisan support. And at this moment, even if your member of Congress likely won't vote for the final bill, they can still reach out to their friends on the other side of the aisle to make certain that this program is retained in the final bill. And so the message is to speak with leaders on the conference committee to ask your member of Congress to do that. But someone who knows a little bit more about conference committee and what's coming up next with regard to how this will all play out is Rene Kuhlman, who is our friend over at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I was hoping maybe Renee could update us on where the National Trust is on this issue, the latest news out of Washington, and how this whole conference thing is going to work out. So Renee, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you so much, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here tonight because I am a huge fan of Senator Cardin and the work that he's done tirelessly on the historic tax credit for many years. And under his leadership, he introduced a bill with Senator Collins of Maine called the Historic Tax Credit Improvement Act, and that has played a pivotal role in getting the historic tax credit into the Senate version of the tax reform bill. So hats off to Senator Cardin. As Nick was saying, we've really come a long way in an extremely short amount of time. When the blueprint came out for tax reform that was released in the House Ways and Means by Speaker Ryan, it really called for the elimination of all tax credits except for two. And the historic tax credit was outlined as one of the things to be eliminated in that sweep. So we knew we had an uphill fight in the House, and so that was when Nick was saying that the bill came out and the historic tax credit was not included, it really got folks galvanized, and people were very much interested in making sure that the Senate version of the tax reform bill included the historic tax credit. So the National Trust and partners like Preservation Maryland and Preserve Louisiana worked with a senator from Louisiana to put in an amendment to, as Nick was saying, get the historic tax credit included in the Senate tax reform bill. The Chairman Hatch from Utah, really wanted to try and keep costs down and reduced it by half. A lot of work then went into trying to get it back to 20%. And as Nick was saying, that the credit now has to be taken over 5 years. He was joined, folks like Preservation Maryland and others had been working on this, members of the Senate Finance Committee for years. And so it was great to see Senator Cassidy joined by Senator Roberts out of Kansas, Senator Grassley out of Iowa, Senator Isaacson out of Georgia, and Senator Scott, who wanted to make sure that the historic tax credit was retained at 20%. And during that effort, Senator Cardin played a role and offered an amendment that would fully restore the historic tax credit. Unfortunately, it was rejected on a party line vote, but if you go and watch the vote, the vote-orama, as they call it, Senator Cardin did a great job bringing this issue up, and several of the other senators, like Senator Portman from Ohio and Senator Scott from South Carolina, were very appreciative of him bringing up this important issue. So one of the things that we're looking at right now is, as Nick was talking about, this going to conference. And we're feeling somewhat optimistic. It's a good sign that there are so many members of the Senate Finance Committee Senate Finance Committee members that have been supportive. So if you look at the 14 Republicans, about 10 of them are supportive of the historic tax credit and have been publicly so. So that's terrific as they move into conference to have that kind of support. We also are thinking that, when the conference committee comes together, that any bill that wouldn't include this Senator Cassidy's amendment to keep it at 20% would be something that, his friends on the Senate Finance Committee and others that have spoken out about it, like Susan Collins and Senator Graham, that would be something that they would not accept in this conference. So we're feeling somewhat optimistic. So the conference committee has been announced on the House side, and I'll tell you who those folks are so you can see those. But as Nick was saying, the important thing is to keep the outreach going, because we want to make sure that these conferees understand the importance of the historic tax credit to constituents. So on the Ways and Means Committee of Chairman Brady from Texas, Representative Nunes from California, Representative Roscom from Illinois, Representative Diane Black from Tennessee, Representative Christy Nome from South Dakota. So those are actually members on the Tax Writing Committee in the House. And because there are also a couple of other provisions that have been put into this bill from the Natural Resources Committee, we have Chairman Rob Bishop from Utah and Representative Don Young. And then from Energy and Commerce Committee, there's Chairman Greg Walden from Oregon and Representative John Shimkus from Illinois. So all of those Republican members have been confirmed to be on the House conference side, and we are waiting, like the rest of the country, to find out about the Senate, who's going to be on that. But we know. Go ahead.
I was just going to say this is really helpful, and I think the other important thing to take away from that, even for people listening to this call, if you recognize that we don't have any Marylanders on the conference committee, is that Maryland legislators know people in other states. And so it's still important for us to reach out to our folks in Maryland because they know people on the other side of the aisle and they know people from all across the Congress, and there are relationships that we don't even know about that could be exploited if our members realize that this is a priority. So it really does still matter to reach out to them.
I'll make you a perfect example of that. I was talking to a member from another state who wasn't on the conference committee, and they said, "Oh, but I go to the gym every morning, and I see, a member on the conference committee. I'll just bring it up with them at the gym tomorrow morning." So I thought, wow, that is really great. you certainly never know where people are going to be, and so I think that is a perfect example of why your outreach is very important. So
yeah, you do never know. So we want to encourage people, if you have a question, you can press *3 at any time. And Ellie, why don't we try and take, if we have any questions right now, let's see if we can't take one.
Absolutely. We do. Scott Pappas in Baltimore County has a great question about what local preservation groups can do. Scott, you are live on the air.
Scott, are you there?
Scott, are you there?
Well, it seems as if maybe we've lost Scott, but that's okay because we got the gist of the
Yep, I have
the gist of the question there.
So, how do local preservation groups encourage local legislators to impact federal lawmakers to support the historic tax credit?
Yeah, well, I think the best thing that local groups can do that they maybe have more so than just a regular individual might have is that they can reach out to legislators with an example of a project in their backyard that has benefited from this. So if they're familiar with a project that has taken advantage of federal historic tax credits in their community, and they can speak from a personal perspective about how that has changed their community, how it has redeveloped or revitalized a neighborhood, I think that that's a fantastic way in which a local group can make a real difference. And I know Renee was talking about Senator Cardin making this impassioned plea before Senate Finance, and we're very proud to be able to say that we provided a lot of the details that made up that impassioned plea and gave him the pictures and gave him the stats and the details and worked with his team to get that out in front of everyone. And so that's the kind of role that a statewide like Preservation Maryland can play, but it certainly can be backed up and can be made even more personal when a local group makes that same pitch. Do we have any other questions?
Sure. We have one from Roderick Scott. Hold on, let's see. Let's see here. Roderick, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I am. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hey, Rod, what do you want to know?
Hey, Nick. Great show. Renee, good to hear you. This is really important stuff and grassroots and all the way out here to Louisiana. Just want to confirm that, once if we were to lose these tax credits, Louisiana has led the way with the Katrina recovery in New Orleans using these tax credits on these older buildings. And if we lose these tax credits, what happens for the next outfit that gets a disaster and doesn't have those tax credits to use? I think it's really critical that we, my efforts, I'm broadening out the advocacy. We're talking to all sorts of people that work in disaster recovery and just explain how useful these things are. So let's all work extra hard the next couple of weeks before Christmas to get this done, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic point, and the credit is actually, as you know, probably better than maybe anyone else. It is really flexible. It's really fantastic after disasters. It was deployed here in Maryland, in Ellicott City, following the flood in 2016. So we absolutely have to have that. So yeah, that's a fantastic point. Thanks, Rod, for that. Do we have any other questions? Maybe we want to grab one more before we move on to our friend with Cross Street Partners.
Sure. We have Samia Kircher from Morgan State University here in Baltimore.
All right,
hold on
great.
Just one moment. All right.
Samia is live.
Okay, thank you.
There we are.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Thanks for letting me chime in. I have a question. Has the Preservation Maryland drafted a statement that we can use to contact our representatives to support the historic tax credit?
Fortunately, the answer to that is yes. I'm glad we were able to say yes. All you have to do is go to preservehtc.org.
Okay.
And there you can actually click Take Action, and it'll take you to a statement that we have that you can send on, or you can edit it to make it your own and sort of sound more like you. But it's all there. It's all very easy to use. So thank you for that question. Yep, preservehtc.org, and you can also get to it through our main website, which is just preservationmaryland.org.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's very helpful.
Great. So why don't we move on now to our final speaker of the evening, and we really wanted to have someone join us from the private sector. So Renee and I represent the nonprofit side, and but really it's the private sector that makes this program work and brings us all of these fantastic projects. And Cross Street Partners here in Baltimore, which is a firm that's doing projects all around the country, has been a leader in this kind of work, has some really exciting projects taking place underway, has completed some exciting projects. And we're very pleased to have Joe Summers with Cross Street Partners just give us a little bit of background on why this makes sense and why the private sector needs this kind of program to make this work possible. So Joe, why don't you take it from here and just give us a sense for who is Cross Street Partners, and maybe talk about some of the historic tax credit projects that you have underway that could be threatened if we were to lose this program.
Thank you, Nick. So Cross Street Partners is sort of a successor organization. We've been around for a little over 7 years, to a very large real estate development company that was in Baltimore for 30-plus years. Some of their projects included the Tye Point campus that is now the Under Armour campus, the Can Company building, Bagby building, parts of Brewers Hill in Baltimore, the Steve Silver building along 83. All of those projects included historic credits, probably most of them, including state historic credits too, which obviously is not, we're just talking about federal here. Currently, under Cross Street, we delivered the Lion Brothers building, which is a 38,000 square foot building just a couple blocks south of the University of Maryland campus in Baltimore. Historic credits were involved there. That's about an $11 million project. Between Stuber Brothers and Cross Street, we've probably completed certainly in excess of $1 billion of QREs over the last 18 to 20 years. And the historic credit has been critical to the completion of all of those projects. The old buildings cost money to fix up, but they look a whole lot better, and it's certainly more efficient to bring an old building back than it is to tear it down and put something new up that just costs more money. Some of the projects we have going on now is the packing house project that's in Cambridge, Maryland. It's an old packing plant that at one point, probably shortly after or around World War II, it made rations for soldiers. It had 10,000 employees in Cambridge, Maryland, which probably was pretty much everybody in town. So we're trying to bring it back as sort of a food space, taking advantage of all the food farms and everything on the eastern shore of Maryland. That's about a $17 million project. Kind of on the opposite, almost the opposite end is we are in the early stages of a former General Electric campus in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is a little over 1 million square feet. We're in discussions with Purdue University and Indiana University and others about turning this. The GE was there for over 100 years, and they took their last people out of the building 5 years ago. The buildings are in relatively decent shape, but it is critical to the regenerating one side of the town in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're also working on a couple of mills in Augusta, Georgia, not adjacent to the golf course, but in the same town. That was actually at one point the Confederate Powder Works. So all the powder that the Confederate Army used in the Civil War was made in the mills on this site. Right now, it is there's a technology company that's in one of the first spaces that was delivered, and the next tenant will be a cybersecurity training center that's actually being operated by UMBC, who's made a market in this field. And then there's an adjacent mill. The two mills together are about 1 million square feet. The adjacent mill will be 250 apartments, and then it will be supporting retail all around the campus. We have a couple of buildings in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, that we're working on that will be also food economy buildings, and then we're working on the Dayton Arcade in Dayton, Ohio. There's a very impressive rotunda that has been vacant for about 30 years, with all sorts of supporting retail and shops that were there that are all closed down now. Another component of the project will actually be Litech Apartments too, but it is a very impressive historic building.
And Joe,
that takes up a block. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask you, how many of these projects would move forward without the historic tax credit?
Very few.
Right. So it's not as if, I think that perhaps is one of the misconceptions that, well, these projects probably would still move forward. They would take longer, or, they would just be more expensive. But in many cases, because of the complexity associated with them, they just wouldn't be attempted.
Yeah, only if some other programs kind of backfilled where you get the historic equity from, would these projects be able to go forward? And most of them are also eligible for new market credits, which seem to be a little more on better footing as with the tax reform. But the combination of those two credits really makes these buildings in low-income communities work.
Right. Well, it's fantastic, and we appreciate that perspective. Ellie, do we want to maybe take a couple more calls as we sort of move to our conclusion here? At any time, people are welcome to press *3. You can ask a question. You'll be forwarded to a call screener, and we can get your call on the air. The other thing that I would mention, again, is you can go to preservehtc.org, the website we've put together for this, and you can send a message there or learn more about how you can take action. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Preservation Maryland has spent a considerable amount of its advocacy fund to pull all of these efforts together. And if you're so inclined and feel supportive of our work, you can also go to our website and make a donation for this effort or for our annual fund to help us out all throughout the year. But Ellie, maybe you can bring up another call.
Sure. And actually, before we go to another call, we did get an interesting question from one of our online participants that I would like to ask because I'd like to hear the answer. Will the reduction or loss of federal credits affect the state tax credit in the future? And this is coming from Rob Brennan.
So I have some thoughts on that, but I'm curious, Renee, you know state credits like the back of your hand, probably better than anyone else in America. What do you think about that?
Well, it's funny, Sean and I were talking about that today because we've been asked that question. And I think that, because of the slight reduction in the value of the federal historic tax credit, you will see smaller communities having a harder time making these historic tax credit projects work. So perhaps some state legislatures might want to increase their state tax credit and make them more effective to sort of take up some of the reduction in the value of the historic tax credit in terms of having to be spread out over 5 years. So that's an option that some state legislatures might want to pursue.
Yeah, and I can tell you here in Maryland, that's something Preservation Maryland, we've actually had a conversation earlier today with a couple of legislators, and our supporters and folks on the call can expect to hear from us in the coming weeks as we approach the next session of the Maryland General Assembly about some of those activities we're going to try and undertake in Maryland to address some of this. So yeah, I think your viewpoint on that is spot on because it's already taking place here in Maryland and all across the country. Ellie, do you have any other questions, any other things coming in that we want to hear about?
Sure. Let's go to Kay in Delaware.
Hi.
Hi,
Thanks
Kay.
for taking my call. I'm very, very interested in this. And I was asking if it would help if Delaware historical societies and preservation supporters joined together quickly to advocate for this.
Yeah, absolutely. The more voices, the better. And having voices from all different states is important. So it's great to get a call from our friends across the border in Delaware. And everything that we're saying here tonight that applies to Marylanders certainly applies in Delaware. So your votes will matter on this, and your voices will matter as well. So I certainly would encourage everyone to get as organized as they possibly can and get the message out because I know this is moving very quickly. So yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for joining us
so much
from across the border. Good to hear from you.
Okay, and we have one from Sandy here in Maryland.
Yes, Nick, we'll be calling our congressman, and it would be helpful to have just a list of the big projects that have taken place in Maryland that they will recognize. Everyone will recognize Ellicott City, but can you list just a few others that, in particular, Jamie Raskin and John Sarbanes might recognize that, this was important for the state?
Yeah, and actually on our Preserve HTC website, if we haven't already, we can add the link to a fantastic mapping tool that was put together by the Novogradac Company, where you can actually look at tax credit projects by congressional district. But I can tell you, just as a sort of an answer to that, some great ones from around the state and within that district that you're talking about there. The National Park Seminary, of course, is a fantastic project in Silver Spring that we like to point to, which has done, tremendous work. And, also we have some fantastic things happening even in the western part of the state. So for John Delaney or supporters listening in from Frederick, obviously, all of downtown Frederick has been touched by this program, but even places as far-flung as Cumberland, in portions of that community that remains distressed, this program is making a real difference. And one is coming online as we speak, which is the Footer Dye Work building, which had previously been listed for demolition, and by the grace of a developer who saw the light and thought he could make this work, is now going to be a mixed-use facility and really could turn around a portion of that city. So there's some fantastic things out there. We have a lot of those details on preservehtc.org. But if anyone on this call has a question about a specific project or they want to know more and they can't find it, feel free to reach out to us, and you can get all of our contact information at preservationmaryland.org. So thanks, Sandy, for the question. Good one. All right. Ellie, I'm seeing here some online questions that I thought I would just jump into. Yeah.
Please.
So Pete Lesher from Easton has asked that he's heard that the timetable for the conference committee is really short, perhaps before Christmas. So what is the window? Renee, do you have any sense for what the window, the time frame, what the timetable looks like moving forward?
I sure do. It's our understanding that the next week and a half is going to be very important for outreach of advocates like yourself. On the outside, we've heard that perhaps there is a idea that they would have the House pass their version on December 20th, the Senate on the 21st, and on the President's desk on the 22nd. And again, that's at the outside. So things could happen much more quickly than that. People are very, very much motivated to get this to the President as soon as possible. So I think you're right. I think you'll see things happen very quickly, and I think advocacy now is good.
Great. And yeah, I mean, advocacy now is important. I would also just mention as a plug as we sort of draw to our conclusion here, that Preservation Maryland, if you want to stay engaged in these types of issues, Preservation Maryland is going to be hosting a Advocacy Day on February 1st in Annapolis, and that will be focused on state advocacy issues. Obviously, it's going to take place after all of this and the dust has settled from this tax reform effort, but there will be a lot of work to do on the state side as a result of what happens in Washington. So if you want to get engaged in that, you can find out more on our website, and that, again, is going to be on February 1st. So let's see here. Do we have any other questions, Ellie, at this time?
Sure. We have one from Mimi in Baltimore.
Okay, great.
Hello.
Hey, Mimi.
Go ahead, Mimi.
Hello. Hi, Nick. This is Mimi Jaguar.
Hi.
Hi. So I attended the Be More Indivisible tax rally thing in Baltimore. I think it was a week ago, Monday. And Ruppersberger and Sarbanes and Cummings were all there. And I started out by looking directly at Cummings, who's my representative, and I said, you have an email in your office. In fact, you probably have more than one from me on this issue, but I thought I'd mention it here tonight, and brought up the historic tax credit, and all three of them looked genuinely shocked, like they had no idea that the historic tax credit wasn't in the bills. So I wondered what the effort's been to reach those House delegates directly, especially since going into conference at this point. They're going to be really important.
Right. It's a fantastic question. We've been reaching out to them for the better part of, well, as Renee was saying, for several years now. Elijah Cummings actually has signed on to the Historic Tax Credit Improvement Act bill, so his name is on the line saying he's in favor of this. And I think what you're getting, and this is just sort of an answer to a broader question here, though, is that there are so many issues at play, and this is why it's so important for people on this call to reach out, because there are so many issues at play. It is almost impossible for any one legislator to be aware of all of them, so we have to keep bringing it to their attention. So I think that your question is really a fantastic way, maybe even just to wrap this call and move to our conclusion here, because it suggests that the work is not done, even though we have a lot of legislators in Maryland who have been very supportive of this program for years. There are a lot of issues taking place right now, and if they don't hear from us about the historic tax credit, we could potentially lose it in the final bill. That's something that Preservation Maryland and the rest of the preservation community is just not comfortable with that happening. It's not going to be a future we accept, and so thanks for the question, and it's a sort of a fantastic way for us to begin to wrap this call. I want to thank our friends with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Rene Kuhlman, Shaw Sprague, and then, of course, our friends at the National Trust Community Investment Corporation, John Lath Tetrol, and the entire team over there, Mike Phillips, who have been doing really tremendous work. And then, of course, thanks to Joe Summers for joining us on the call today. It's fantastic to hear from just one of the many developers across Maryland who make this program work and who are doing a lot of work to help redevelop our communities. If you were so moved tonight to get involved, please visit preservehtc.org. There you can take action right away. You can also help us out by making a quick donation to our advocacy fund, which is supporting all of this work and the outreach to the thousands of homes that we reached out to tonight through this program. Again, as I said, this is probably one of the largest online telephone gatherings of Maryland preservationists in the state history, and hopefully the first of many outreach efforts like this, but hopefully we won't be back fighting for the historic tax credit, but instead fighting for new programs and trying to advance our mission and advance the cause, not just fighting to save existing programs. But with your support, I'm sure we can make all of that happen. Thanks to everyone who stuck with us through this entire call. I'm looking here at numbers that have been with us for 43 minutes, and that is just fantastic and speaks to the tremendous supporters that we have. So from everyone here at Preservation Maryland, I want to thank you, wish you a very happy holiday season, ask for your support, both your financial support, but also truly ask for you to make those calls and to get in touch with your members of Congress. You won't regret it when we end up saving this incredibly important program. And again, if you have any questions that weren't answered during this call, as we conclude the call, you can just stay on the line, ask that question, leave a comment, and we will receive it, and then I'll be able to respond to you, or someone here on the team will be able to respond to you in the next few days. So again, thank you from everyone at Preservation Maryland, and we appreciate the great support of our members all across the state. Stay tuned, and we'll be in touch very soon.